Never should be made. Terrible. But that's what I do. I make the things that nobody else would make.
When Mel Brooks opened the door of his quiet home at 99, the man who made the world laugh sat in a silence colder than death itself. Across from him was one trusted journalist, and what he revealed shattered Hollywood's illusions. Rob Reiner, Mel said, wasn't just murdered. He was sacrificed by the very kindness that defined him. To the world, Mel is a comedy legend. But to Rob, he was Uncle Mel, the man who changed his diapers, guided his career, and filled the space Carl Reiner left behind. He didn't just witness the Reiner legacy, he lived it at the dinner table. Now he's grieving the friend who isn't here to see what came of it all. This tragedy, Mel said, didn't strike overnight. It was a slow-motion crash decades in the making. He saw Nick Reiner not as a lost soul, but as someone who weaponized his parents' love. While the media talked about mental illness, Mel pointed at the real problem: the fatal refusal to say no. He didn't speak to mourn the dead, he spoke to warn the living. In his armchair, surrounded by a lifetime of memories, Mel's hands shook, not from age, but from rage he'd buried for years. Everyone thought December 14th was a breakdown, but Mel swore it wasn't an accident. "We watched it happen," he said, "and we did nothing because we loved Rob too much to stop him." Then came the memory that still broke his voice. Just 6 months earlier, Rob had stopped by for their usual Sunday ritual, something he'd done since Carl passed away. But that day there were no jokes, no laughter, only pacing, fear, and whispered confessions. Rob told him Nick was back home after another failed rehab, but this time something was different. Nick wasn't lost. He was aggressive, delusional, and dangerously entitled. Then Rob said the words that still haunt Mel's house. He had started locking his bedroom door at night. Imagine that. The man who once directed dreams now living in fear in his own home. A master of control everywhere but where it mattered most, his own life. Inside his walls, the great director had lost control of the script. The man who taught America how to communicate was now trapped in a nightmare he couldn't rewrite. The irony was brutal. The master of dialogue had gone silent, hiding from his own son. When Mel asked the obvious question, "Why not call the police, get a restraining order?" Rob's answer became his own epitaph. "I promised Michelle I wouldn't give up on him. If I kick him out, he dies on the street. If I keep him, maybe I can save him." Mel slammed his hand down, telling that story. He'd begged Rob to see it for what it was, not salvation, but surrender. That stubborn Reiner will, the same drive that built his career, had turned fatal. Rob believed love could protect him, but Mel saw the truth. To a manipulator, patience looks like weakness. Mel watched his friend crumble under the weight of that Hollywood illusion, the belief that money and heart could fix anything. Rob thought he could direct his son's recovery like a movie, set the scene, light it right, and get the ending he wanted. But life doesn't do second takes. As a man who knew both comedy and tragedy, Mel saw the third act coming, a father guarding a locked door from the danger inside. What chilled him most wasn't just fear. It was the control. Behind the walls of their Brentwood mansion, Rob and Michelle were being drained emotionally and financially. Nick had turned their love and their money into ammunition. He wasn't asking for help, he was demanding payment. Nick twisted their compassion into a weapon, blaming his failures on his parents' fame. He claimed his pain owed him millions. It was cold, calculated, and terrifyingly clear-headed. Mel said Rob would come over with tears in his eyes, clutching his phone, showing messages from Nick, vicious, hateful texts no parent should ever see. And still, Rob kept paying. Mel called it the transaction of guilt. Rob thought if he kept paying, maybe the hostage taker, his own son, would finally let him go. He believed he could buy back love, not realizing he was funding his own destruction. Then came the holiday gathering. Mel can't forget. A small party, Polite smiles, forced laughter, tension thick enough to snap. Nick was there, quiet but sharp, watching Rob the way a predator studies prey. At one point, Rob cracked one of his classic jokes, the kind that had charmed audiences for decades. Everyone laughed automatically. Everyone except Nick. He just stared, cold, blank, soulless. Mel said that stare froze his blood, because there was nothing human left in it. That night, Mel couldn't stay silent anymore. He pulled Rob into the hallway, grabbed his shoulders, and said the hardest words of his life. "Robbie, you need to get him out. He doesn't look at you with love. He looks at you with ownership." Mel said he could feel it. Nick didn't want a father. He wanted a resource. Fame without effort, money without consequence. But Rob, loyal and blinded by love, pulled away. "You sound like the critics," he said. "You don't know him like I do. He's in pain." Mel broke down recalling that moment. He said he wept not only for Rob's death, but for the death of truth itself. He watched his closest friend choose denial over survival, step back into a house already consumed by danger, and Mel knew exactly what was coming. That's when his grief turned to fury, not at Nick, but at the Hollywood machine that enabled it all. The high-priced therapists, consultants, and experts who surrounded the Reiners like bodyguards of denial. Mel called them what they were, accomplices. He revealed something chilling. Rob didn't build his delusion alone. He bought it. For years, professionals reassured him, dismissed Michelle's fears, and wrapped every warning in soft psychology. They said radical acceptance was the cure and tough love was outdated. They told Rob his son's aggression wasn't danger, it was a cry for help. That he didn't need boundaries, just patience, understanding, and more money. Mel called it a sanitization of evil. They took violent behavior and gave it a harmless name. They called it neurodivergence, Mel growled. They told him it was a disorder. They didn't tell him it was a death sentence. This, Mel said, is the curse of the wealthy. In any normal home, if a son threatens his parents, the police are called. But in the Reiner mansion, it was image managers and therapists who showed up to de-escalate. They treated a homicide in the making like a PR issue. Mel said these people knew Rob's weakness, his heart. They told him if he kicked Nick out, whatever happened next would be his fault. They weaponized his compassion, feeding him the line he wanted to hear. "Your son isn't bad, he's just sick." And Rob, desperate to believe it, paid them to keep that fantasy alive. To the outside world, the Brentwood estate looked flawless. Perfect lawns, glowing lights, a legacy untouchable. But inside, Mel said, it was collapsing from the core. A house built on denial, propped up by people too scared or too greedy to tell the truth. He compared it to a cancer misdiagnosed as a cold. The doctors knew it was fatal, but smiled anyway. And now those same experts are silent. Where are they now? Mel asked. The ones who preached radical acceptance? Gone, vanished into the background, leaving only destruction behind. Rob had spent his life trusting professionals, cinematographers to light the frame, writers to craft the words, and in the end, doctors to save his son. But they failed him. They chose comfort over truth, process over protection. The knife might have been in Nick's hand, Mel said, but the path to that bedroom was cleared by people too afraid to say no. It was his sharpest indictment of modern culture, a world that believes everything can be therapized away. Some darkness, Mel whispered, can't be cured, only survived. Then came the night everything ended. The police report covers the facts, times, entry points, blood patterns. But Mel remembers how it felt. It was late. Mel was already in bed, surrounded by decades of memories, when the phone rang one last time. He almost didn't answer. At 99, late-night calls rarely bring good news, but instinct made him pick up. On the other end was Rob Reiner, his voice barely a whisper. "He's spiraling again, Mel. He's screaming about the will. He thinks we're cutting him out." That was the moment years of manipulation turned lethal. Nick wasn't just angry, he was taking over. He'd convinced himself his parents had stolen his future, and now he wanted to collect. Mel, who had guided Rob from childhood to stardom, gave one final direction, not as a joke, but as an order. "Get in the car, Robbie, right now. Just drive. Come here. Don't stay in that house." It was the only sane move left. Escape and survive. This is where the story turns from crime to tragedy. Rob paused. Mel could hear his breath, the gears turning, the choice between survival and love. "I can't leave. Michelle's in the room with him," Rob said, his voice breaking. "She's trying to calm him down. If I go, he'll turn on her." The words hung in the air like smoke. Rob knew the danger. He saw those cold, wild eyes, but he still chose love over safety. He chose to be a husband before a survivor. Mel begged him, "Get Michelle and run." But Rob knew it was too late. Leaving meant abandoning her to a nightmare, and he couldn't do that. So Rob Reiner did the bravest and most tragic thing a man can do. He hung up the phone, not to flee, but to walk back toward the shouting, the chaos, the son he couldn't save. That click, the last sound before silence, still echoes in Mel's nightmares. It marked the end of a friendship, the end of a dynasty, and the start of a horror no one could rewrite. The media called Nick a storm, chaos personified. But Mel swears it wasn't just madness. Rob didn't die cowering. He died standing in the gap, trying to protect his wife, trying to stop a war he didn't start. The tragedy wasn't only that he died, it's that his sacrifice couldn't save her. Nick took them both. For Mel, that helplessness is unbearable. A man who spent a century fixing everything, scripts, jokes, careers, found himself powerless. Holding that phone, listening to the deadline hum in the dark, Mel realized the truth. The director had lost control of the set. The villains had taken over the stage. That final click didn't just end Rob Reiner's life, it detonated decades of buried resentment. Sitting alone in his living room, surrounded by ghosts of laughter and legacy, Mel finally saw what no headline could explain. This wasn't only madness, it was envy that had been rotting for years. Being born a Reiner was supposed to be a blessing, but to Nick, it was a curse. Carl Reiner built comedy, Rob Reiner built cinema, and Nick, he lived in their shadows, trying to climb a mountain already conquered. Mel admitted Nick had talent, sure, but no grit. He wanted the applause without the grind, Mel said. When Hollywood didn't bow, Nick turned his anger toward the man whose success haunted him. It wasn't just envy, it was revenge. He wanted to destroy the father whose greatness made his own failures impossible to ignore. But Nick didn't spiral alone. Mel's voice turned cold as he leaned forward. He had parasites around him, he said. They lived off Rob's money, fueled Nick's resentment, told him he was the victim and his parents were the villains. Nick held the weapon, Mel said, but others sharpened the blade. These hangers-on kept him angry because his anger paid their bills. From the outside, the Reiner's mansion gleamed. Perfect lawns, twinkling lights, Hollywood magic. But inside, greed and manipulation had hollowed it out. Mel called it a demolition, not an accident. The friends, the doctors, even the so-called experts, all of them played a part. All of them too afraid to say no. The interview ended quietly. Mel looked out the window, sunlight hitting his worn face like an unwanted spotlight. "No more secrets," he said. "Only the truth now." And that truth cuts deep. Rob Reiner wasn't killed by madness alone. He was destroyed by love without limits. Enabling isn't love, Mel said. It's surrender. You can't hug a storm without getting swept away. You can't cure danger by excusing it. So when Nick Reiner stands in that courtroom, don't just see a headline. Remember Mel Brooks, 99 years old, sitting in silence, mourning the boy he once held and the friend he couldn't save. Remember, every tragedy starts with ignored warnings and doors left unlocked. Rob Reiner's films will always be his legacy, but thanks to Mel Brooks, his story is also a warning. Mercy without boundaries can destroy everything you love. Rest in peace, Rob and Michelle. The curtain has fallen, but the lesson will never fade.